They were ordinary women living ordinary lives in extraordinary times. They were mothers who rocked their children to sleep with ancient lullabies, daughters who learned the secrets of healing from their grandmothers, wise women who understood the mysteries of childbirth and the healing properties of forest herbs. They were the midwives who brought life into the world, the herbalists who eased pain and suffering, the elderly widows who carried within their minds centuries of accumulated knowledge about medicine and the natural world. Yet history has branded them with a single, terrifying name: witches. From the darkest corridors of medieval Europe through the dawn of the modern age, tens of thousands of innocent souls were accused of serving the devil himself and condemned to perish in the merciless embrace of flames. This is not mere legend spun from folklore and superstition, not tales whispered around winter fires to frighten children into obedience. This is harsh, documented reality, a reality so dark and profound that its echoes still reverberate through our contemporary world, reminding us of humanity's capacity for both unspeakable cruelty and collective madness on a scale that defies comprehension. Before we embark on this harrowing journey through one of history's most shameful chapters, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, activate that notification bell, leave a thoughtful comment below sharing your thoughts, and please share this video with others who value historical truth over comfortable fiction. The memory of these countless victims must never fade into obscurity, for to forget their suffering would be to dishonor their pain and leave ourselves dangerously vulnerable to repeating such atrocities. In the beating heart of medieval Europe, fear reigned supreme as the ultimate law of the land. This was a world where the average person lived barely 30 years, where infant mortality claimed 1 in 3 children, where a single failed harvest could mean starvation for entire communities. Every devastating famine that left children with hollow cheeks, every plague that swept through villages like the angel of death, every violent tempest that destroyed precious harvests, all of these natural disasters demanded an explanation, a human face upon which to project blame and uncontrollable rage. When rational explanations failed, when the natural world seemed to turn hostile without apparent cause, society's accusing finger inevitably pointed toward those who lived on the margins, those who dared to be different. The solitary women who chose independence over marriage, the skilled midwives whose knowledge of women's bodies seemed almost supernatural, the herbalists who understood the secret properties of roots and leaves in ways that appeared magical to the uninitiated masses. A mere whisper of suspicion, a single accusation muttered in the marketplace or church courtyard, was enough to set in motion the terrible machinery of medieval justice. Evil required a face, and that face was methodically constructed from a poisonous mixture of ancient superstitions, personal grudges, economic rivalries, and profound ignorance of the natural world. In the fateful year of 1486, a book emerged that would fundamentally alter the landscape of European persecution forever: the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. Authored by 2 Dominican friars, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, this sinister manual became the official guidebook for identifying, prosecuting, and executing alleged witches across the continent. The book's publication marked a turning point in the history of persecution, transforming sporadic, localized witch hunts into a systematic, continent-wide campaign of terror. The Malleus was a masterpiece of misogynistic pseudoscience, providing detailed instructions on how to recognize supposed signs of witchcraft in the most mundane daily activities. Its pages painted womankind as inherently weak-willed, naturally inclined toward sin, and therefore easy prey for demonic influence and corruption. A woman who knew too much about healing, clearly in league with Satan. One who lived independently without male supervision, obviously corrupted by evil forces. A widow whose presence seemed to coincide with unfortunate events, undoubtedly a servant of darkness. The book transformed suspicion into methodology, paranoia into procedure, and from that moment forward, the hunt for witches became systematic, almost scientific in its terrible efficiency. The Malleus provided detailed legal procedures for conducting trials, specific torture techniques for extracting confessions, and elaborate theological justifications for the mass execution of the accused. Thousands upon thousands of women found themselves crushed beneath the weight of this institutionalized madness, their fate sealed by the twisted logic of 2 celibate monks who had transformed their own psychological demons into a manual for mass murder. Tell me in the comments what you believe. Was this religious fervor, political maneuvering, or simply the manifestation of primitive fear in an age that had not yet learned to question its own assumptions? The trials themselves were elaborate theaters of horror, carefully choreographed performances designed to extract confessions and terrorize populations into absolute conformity. These were not trials in any modern sense of the word. They were ritualized torments that began with a predetermined conclusion and worked backward to justify that outcome through whatever means necessary. Inquisitors, armed with both religious authority and legal sanction, employed torture with scientific precision to break the will of the accused. The search for the devil's marks was perhaps one of the most degrading aspects of the entire process. The accused was stripped naked and subjected to intimate examination by court-appointed officials who searched obsessively for any physical imperfection that could be interpreted as evidence of diabolic alliance. Moles, scars, birthmarks, any unusual growth could become definitive proof of supernatural corruption. The devil's mark was said to be insensitive to pain, so suspected areas were pricked with needles, with any lack of reaction taken as confirmation of guilt. The tortures employed were both systematic and horrific in their creativity. The strappado involved hoisting victims by their arms tied behind their back, causing excruciating dislocation of the shoulders. The rack slowly stretched the body, pulling joints apart with deliberate precision. Red-hot irons were applied to sensitive areas, burning flesh while extracting screams. Perhaps most insidious was sleep deprivation torture, where victims were kept awake for days or weeks, their eyelids held open with metal clamps, breaking down psychological resistance without leaving obvious physical marks. Under such unimaginable agony, the accused were forced to confess to having made pacts with Satan himself, to having participated in nighttime Sabbaths, where they allegedly danced naked with demons, to having cast curses upon crops or innocent children who fell ill. The torture chambers echoed with the agonized screams of women whose only crimes were often nothing more than possessing traditional knowledge, showing independence of spirit, or simply being in the wrong place when misfortune struck their communities. These screams of the innocent mingled grotesquely with the holy prayers of their tormentors, creating a hellish symphony of suffering that was somehow sanctified by religious righteousness. When the accused, finally broken in body and spirit by prolonged torture, admitted to fabricated crimes they had never committed, the sentence was always inevitable: death by fire, the flames intended to purify both victim and community from the stain of supposed evil. In the public squares of countless European towns and cities, crowds gathered like audiences at a macabre festival. The execution by fire was deliberately transformed into public spectacle, a terrifying warning to anyone who might dare to challenge established authority. The smoke rose high above the gathered masses, visible for miles around, while the nauseating smell of burning human flesh permeated the air, creating an olfactory memory that would haunt witnesses for the rest of their lives. The atmosphere was festive, almost carnival-like, with vendors selling food and drink to spectators who treated the burning of human beings as a form of popular entertainment. Yet behind each condemnation lay a complex web of motivations that had little to do with genuine religious belief. Political interests, personal vendettas, economic rivalries, property disputes, and social tensions all played crucial roles in determining who would face accusation and who would escape suspicion. Often, it required nothing more than a neighbor's hatred, someone's envy of your property, or a business rival's desire to eliminate competition to find yourself facing accusations of witchcraft. The historical examples are both numerous and horrifying in their scope and brutality. In 1692, in the colonial town of Salem, Massachusetts, what began as the strange behavior of several young girls spiraled into one of the most famous witch trials in history. Nearly 200 people were formally accused during the Salem trials, with 20 ultimately executed and many others imprisoned in deplorable conditions. The trials claimed victims from all levels of society, from homeless beggars like Sarah Good to respected church members like Rebecca Nurse, demonstrating how quickly accusations could spiral out of control. In Sweden, in the remote village of Torsåker in 1675, 71 human beings, men, women, and even children, were burned alive in a single day, creating one of the largest mass executions in Scandinavian history. The flames consumed entire families, destroying not just individual lives, but the very fabric of the community itself. Contemporary accounts describe the horror of watching children as young as 7 years old, burned alongside their mothers and grandmothers, their screams echoing across the countryside. In Italy, the mountain town of Triora, in Liguria, became the site of extensive witch trials during the late 16th century, when dozens of women faced prosecution by the Roman Inquisition. The town's population was decimated, its social structure destroyed, and its reputation forever marked by these events. Triora is still known today as the Italian Salem, a sobering reminder of how quickly fear can transform neighbors into executioners. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to create an entire video dedicated solely to the tragic story of Triora, exploring in detail how this once thriving mountain community became synonymous with one of Italy's darkest chapters of persecution. The German states became the epicenter of witch-hunting madness, with persecution reaching levels of intensity that defied imagination. The Prince Bishop Julius Ector of Würzburg presided over the execution of more than 600 people between 1626 and 1631, while his contemporary, Prince Bishop Gottfried Johann Georg Fuchs Dornheim of Bamberg, orchestrated an even more horrific campaign that claimed approximately 1,000 lives. Entire villages were decimated, families destroyed, communities torn apart by suspicion and fear. The case of Johannes Junius, a wealthy mayor of Bamberg, illustrates the arbitrary nature of these persecutions. Despite his prominent position and unblemished reputation, Junius was arrested in 1628 on charges of witchcraft. Under torture, he confessed to crimes he had never committed, but he managed to smuggle a letter out of prison describing his treatment. "Now, dear child," he wrote to his daughter, "here you have all my confession, for which I must die. And they are sheer lies and made-up things, so help me God. They never leave off with the torture till one confesses something he never did." But this reign of terror could not last forever. Beginning in the 17th century, with the gradual emergence of the Age of Enlightenment and the development of more rigorous scientific methods, voices of reason slowly began to challenge the prevailing madness. Progressive scholars, philosophers, and even some clergy members started questioning the validity of popular beliefs about witchcraft, courageously denouncing the obvious insanity of the persecutions. The scientific revolution brought new ways of understanding disease, weather patterns, and human psychology that made supernatural explanations seem increasingly primitive and unfounded. Legal scholars began to question the procedures used in witch trials, pointing out the obvious flaws in confession-based prosecutions that relied heavily on torture and hearsay evidence. Friedrich Spee, a German Jesuit priest who had served as confessor to condemned witches, wrote a devastating critique of witch trial procedures, arguing that the entire system was fundamentally flawed. The witch hunts gradually faded as education spread and rational thinking began to replace superstition, but the price paid for this transition was catastrophically high. Historians estimate that between the 15th and 18th centuries, somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe and its colonies, though some scholars suggest the true number may have been significantly higher. The overwhelming majority were women, often elderly, poor, or otherwise marginalized members of their communities, but the numerical toll represents only part of the true cost. The persecution destroyed invaluable traditional knowledge about medicine, agriculture, and natural philosophy that had been preserved in folk traditions for centuries. The fear of accusation silenced generations of wise women who might otherwise have continued to develop and transmit their understanding of healing and natural science. The social trust that binds communities together was shattered in thousands of towns and villages, creating trauma that lasted for generations. Today, when we speak of witches, we often think of Halloween decorations, fantasy novels, or historical curiosities. The commercialization and romanticization of witchcraft has largely obscured the historical reality of the persecution, transforming symbols of terror into sources of entertainment. Yet behind these contemporary images lies the memory of real lives destroyed, of knowledge lost, of communities torn apart by fear and hatred. The witch hunts represent one of history's clearest examples of how ignorance, prejudice, and institutionalized violence can combine to create systematic injustice on a massive scale. They remind us of humanity's capacity for both individual cruelty and collective madness, of how ordinary people can become complicit in extraordinary evil when fear overrides reason and compassion. The lessons of the witch hunts remain painfully relevant in our contemporary world. Every time a society seeks scapegoats for its problems, every time fear of the other overrides respect for evidence and due process, every time prejudice masquerades as righteousness, we risk rekindling the same fires that consumed so many innocent lives centuries ago. The specific beliefs may change, but the underlying dynamics of scapegoating, mass hysteria, and the persecution of the vulnerable remain constant human temptations. We must remember that the witch hunts were not the product of a uniquely barbaric age or primitive people fundamentally different from ourselves. They were carried out by individuals who considered themselves civilized, moral, and rational, who believed they were serving God and protecting their communities from genuine threats. This realization should humble us and remind us of our own potential for both good and evil. The women who died in those flames, accused of crimes they never committed and powers they never possessed, deserve more than our pity. They deserve our remembrance, our respect, and our commitment to ensuring that such injustices never happen again. Their screams, echoing across the centuries, remind us that the price of freedom and justice is eternal vigilance against the forces of fear and hatred. If you've stayed with me through this journey into one of history's darkest chapters, I ask you to take action in their memory. Like this video to help others discover this important history, subscribe to this channel, activate that notification bell, and most importantly, share this video with others who need to understand how quickly civilization can descend into barbarism when fear overrides reason. Tell me in the comments. Do you see parallels between the witch hunts and contemporary forms of persecution? How can we honor the memory of these victims while protecting our communities from similar outbreaks of collective madness? Your voice is crucial in keeping alive the memory of those who died and in preventing history from repeating its most shameful chapters. This has been the story of the witch hunts, told without filters or comfortable euphemisms. Not a legend, but a documented truth that belongs to all of us. A reminder of both our potential for cruelty and our responsibility to choose something better. The flames that consumed those innocent bodies should illuminate our path toward a more just and rational world, where fear does not triumph over evidence, where difference is not criminalized, and where the vulnerable are protected rather than persecuted.